Okay, now we're going to explore what the sun in the second house means and have a look at how it manifests in some specific charts. We'll use three people: Priyanka Chopra, Stephen King, and Candy Barr. So let's get started by a quick recap of what the second house symbolizes. As you can see, it is physically the area of the sky that's just below the eastern horizon, and that is what it symbolizes. Below the eastern horizon means like the foundation or support for the sunrise. And that's the basis of the second house. It supports the sunrise. Whatever the sunrise symbolizes, the second house is favorable to that. So for example, the sunrise symbolizes the beginning of things. So the second house is all about things which are pro-beginning, or which help us do things, which help us start things. So this is why it's the house of the foundations, the preparations, the prerequisites. And this is why it symbolizes stability or having strong foundation. Similarly, it's the house of family because family is what gives birth to us. It starts us, right? And it signifies all of the supporters and friends who help us do things. Furthermore, on this theme, the second house signifies wealth, because wealth is like the capital that we need to make an enterprise, to do something. What we need to be able to start an endeavor is wealth or health. So the second house symbolizes also nutrition, how we get our health. Another thing about the sunrise is that it causes things to become visible. So the second house is also pro-visibility. And that means making things known or having knowledge. And also it means knowability or tangibility or real practical things. Now that was a good recap of what the second house represents. Let's do a similar quick recap for what the sun represents before we go on to talk about the sun in the second house. So the basis for the sun's symbolism is the idea of soul. That's what the sun is really all about, the soul. One aspect of soul is that this is the animus or the source of our consciousness or awareness. And this is why the sun represents awareness, which is signified by light. Light that makes you aware of things, right? So light brings vision and also visibility. On the concept of visibility, this is why the sun signifies visible things, public things. It's the extraverse, the visible world, and it's the extraversive gender, the male gender, the gender which comes out. On the concept of light bringing vision, vision means clarity. Clarity means the ability to make decisions, and this is why the sun represents command, leadership ability, authority. Another thing about the soul is that it's the source of our vitality and life. So this is why the sun represents health and vitality. But also, the source of our life is like the focal point for our sense of self. So the sun represents the self in terms of how we define ourselves. What is our identity? What is our ego? Like our pride and our esteem, self-esteem, and things like that. And because the focal point for the self is the central point for life, the sun represents the central point of things, the core of things. And hence it's the stabilizer of things, or the pin around which everything else revolves. All in all, it represents the central figure, the most important figure, the most authoritative figure, so we can say it represents the boss, or the king. Okay, now all of our foundations are done. We understand the sun and the second house. Let's talk about how they vibe together. What happens if you put the sun in the second house? One thing which we should mention first is that there's kind of a incompatibility between the sun and the second house. And it is on the basis that the sun is a very public thing, but the second house is a private place. It's a place for family. So with the sun and the second house, you get the signification of non-domesticability, indomesticability, untamability. And the natives tend to be more enthusiastic about their career than they are about their family. Or they would put their career first. They would sacrifice the family's interests for the interests of the career, etc. And also on the same theme, the privacy of the second house clashing with the publicity of the sun, they kind of favor publicity at the expense of their own privacy. So this is one issue with the sun in the second house. The other things that I want to mention about the sun in the second house are favorable. The sun, for example, is the core, right? It signifies stability, and the second house is foundations. It signifies stability. So with the sun in the second house, you get a stabilized person. You get a very consistent person. And it will mostly pertain to what they really care about, which is career and publicity. So they'll be very consistent in their work. They'll be very consistent at their job, or at least in their chores. And the third thing, which is very important to mention and understand about the sun in the second house, is that there's another nice vibe or synergistic vibe between the sun representing health and the second house representing health. So a person with the sun in the second house should be healthy. And that means strong, not ill. And it also means looks. The health affects the appearance, so they should look good. Now, let's get to the really interesting part. Let's see how this theory about the sun in the second house actually manifests in practical, real charts. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll use three subjects who are famous who have the sun in the second house: Priyanka Chopra, Candy Bar, and Stephen King. Let's first of all look at the concept that the sun in the second house makes you a non-domestic person, or an untamable person, putting career before family, publicity before privacy. Definitely three of these people fit that mold, but not all of them in the same exact way. Let's ask this question: does this really describe Priyanka Chopra? Not really. Of course, quite a bit, because she's a celebrity. So that just goes without saying that you sacrifice your privacy for your publicity, and you sacrifice your private life, which means family life, for the interest of the career. But it's not really over the top in Priyanka Chopra. Why is that? One very obvious reason why is because she has a house exchange between the first and the second houses. She has Mercury, the first lord, in Cancer, the second house, and she has Moon, the second lord, in Gemini, the first house. So the second house, therefore, is quite important to Priyanka Chopra, which means she values family. That's why it doesn't go over the top. Additionally, she has Venus, the fifth lord, in the first house. So that means love, relationships are very important to her. So although she has sun in the second house, she will have some of these traits of non-domestic ability, but they're not really pronounced. On the other hand, if we ask the same question of how well this matches Candy Bar, we think it matches her a lot. I mean, very much. So why? Well, she has the first lord in the first house, which is very me-ish. She has the seventh lord in the sixth house, which is not very favorable to partnership and relationships. And she has Saturn in the 10th house, which means unashamedness. So it's really emphasizing the ability to be public. Furthermore, she has a very high sex drive because Mars in Libra from the 5th house is aspecting Ketu in Capricorn in the 8th house. Now, interestingly, Priyanka Chopra has something very similar. She has Mars and Libra in the 5th house aspecting a node, the opposite node, Ketu in Capricorn in the 8th house. Not as strongly, and it's the opposite node. So that alone goes a long way to explaining the difference between the sexiness of Candy Bar versus the sexiness of Priyanka. Now, thirdly, let's see about Stephen King, the non-domestic putting career. Yeah, kind of, but not really in terms of his actual marriage. So you notice with him, like Priyanka Chopra, he has the first lord in the second house. So the second house is important to him. And additionally, he has the seventh lord in the first house. So he's submitting to the partner. So again, although it's a yes, of course, this looks like Stephen King, but it's not really pronounced for Stephen King. Let's move on to the next point about the sun in the second house, which is a consistent worker, a hard worker, a person with a work ethic. How about Priyanka? Very much. Why so much? Well, besides having the sun in the second house, she has an exalted Saturn, the planet of work. Candy bar. Is she a consistent, reliable worker? Extremely, very. Candy bar went out to her job, which was stripping, but she went out to her job on the same day that she was released from jail, having been arrested for shooting her husband, who barged into her house against her will or against the law or something. Or that's how much of a consistent, reliable worker she was. And why? Again, same thing. She has a very prominent Saturn. It's not exalted like Priyanka, but it's in the 10th house alone. And Saturn is the planet for work, so it's assisting the implication of the sun in the second house. That's the point. If something else in your chart assists the implication of something else, then it becomes stronger. If nothing else in your chart assists or reinforces the interpretation of something, then it doesn't become strong at all. So Candy Bar has the sun in the second house, which means a consistent worker, and she has Saturn prominent in the 10th house, which means a consistent worker. So it's really the case for her. Stephen King, of the three, the most work-oriented person of these three. Why so much? Not only does he have Saturn in the first house, but his Saturn is his sixth lord. So he has the sixth lord as Saturn in the first house. Finally, let's take a look at this third trait which we expect, which is to be healthy, which means strong and good-looking. Is Priyanka Chopra good-looking? That's an easy question to answer. She's extremely good-looking. Why so much? Because besides having the sun in the second house, she has the moon and Venus in the first house, which is Gemini. So she has a beautiful sign with two beautiful planets in the first house and happens to have the sun in the second. How about Candy Bar? Is she beautiful? Obviously she's beautiful, otherwise she wouldn't be the first modern, sex symbol. What about her? She has Gemini rising and Mercury is in Gemini. First lord is in the first house. And Mercury is a beautiful planet. How about Mr. King? I apologize, but that's not really Mr. King's strong point. He's a writer. He's not a model or even an actor. So he doesn't really look very handsome or healthy or anything like that. Why not? He has the sun in the second house. Yes, but he doesn't have Mercury and Gemini in the first house or the Venus and Moon and Gemini in the first house. What does he have in his first house? He has Saturn in his first house. And how is Saturn doing there? It's not so happy. It's in Leo. So I hope this has helped you to get a grasp not only for how to work out the basic theory of a planet like the sun in a house like the second house, but also see the theory and operation behind how you use a basic interpretation in an actual chart by contrasting it with the rest of the things. If you want to actually have my interpretations for all of your placements in your chart, you can go to my website and order that from the charts page. It's victorcara.com/R2. Thank you so much.